This used to be the entrance to my garage. I haven't put my car in it for 40 years because I needed a photographic darkroom and there wasn't anywhere else available in my small house. It was also a very small garage. But this video is about some uniquely large things which evolved in it. I'm talking about pictures. Pictures which are made a long time ago and which are quite unlike anything made before or since. This picture is a contact print. That is to say, it is the same size as the piece of film which passed through the camera. My name is Westmoreland and the subject matter I specialise in is landscape and the built environment. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about a unique procedure I developed over a 25-year period for making giant transparent images. It's never been paralleled and it's unlikely ever to be repeated. Experienced photographers know that colour transparency film has got much greater information content than colour negative. We've all seen 35mm slides projected in great detail. Professionals, however, often wanted even larger pieces of film for even greater amounts of detailed information. Around 1970, the largest piece of transparency film that was bought in a shop measured 10 inches by 8 inches, which had 50 times the area of a 35mm frame. It was at that time I conceived a method of multiplying this again by a factor of 10, giving a frame area now 500 times that of a 35mm slide. Here's another illustration showing the same comparison. First, a 35mm slide. Second, a 10-inch by 8-inch. And then, one of my monster transparencies. How I achieved the technology to do this successfully is the purpose of this short film. This is one of the smaller cameras I used. As you can see, it turns on its own axis and can go all the way round, photographing as it goes the whole 360 degrees. It belongs to a family of instruments called the circuits, which were designed over 100 years ago. The smallest circuits took 5-inch height film rolls, and the largest took 16-inch height film rolls. In 1970, they were still the only cameras capable of total rotation photography. The sole film manufactured for them was black and white negative, which came in large and therefore very expensive rolls, and the only positive output was in the form of same-sized contact prints. The main use they were put to was in photographing very large groups of people. This is me and my school photograph, taken in 1948 by this very method. At that time, the only rolls of colour film which approached the dimensions needed for a circuit camera were those made for special aerial survey work. This activity involved the use of giant cameras bolted to the floor of aeroplanes, and these took massive film lengths of 250 feet. This stuff could only be processed in gigantic machines at extremely high temperatures of around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. My big breakthrough was in finding and purchasing a stock of a one-off colour aerial transparency film, which could be processed at an ambient room temperature of around 70 degrees. This made it possible to process short lengths by hand in a conventional darkroom. The method employed is shown here, rolling it backwards and forwards in long troughs of chemicals. The process involved 5 separate hand-mixed chemical baths and took an hour and a half. The film was panchromatic, so most of that time was spent in total darkness without safe lights. Let's go back for a moment and look at the old panoramic cameras I was using and how I adapted them to use this material. This shows one of the smaller models of circuit camera with the back open. Here you can now see the secret at the heart of the machine. It's a slit, and this is where the exposure takes place. There is no shutter. The film travels continuously across it as the camera turns on its axis. The film is on a spool tightly wound and has a light-tight paper leader so that you can load it in the light. Once the exposure has been made, the film is wound back onto the spool with the slit closed. Round at the front, there is a bellows which allows for lenses of different focal length to be used. The longer the focal length, the longer is the piece of film needed to cover the same arc of view. The longest focal length was 36 inches, and that needed a piece of film 20 feet long to traverse 360 degrees. There was also a rise and fall facility for the lens. This latter is a very important asset to the panoramic photographer, as the cameras will only rotate when set at dead level. My first problem was to devise a method of getting the film in and out of the camera while away shooting in the field. First of all, I had to make special spools by turning them down in a wood lathe, and also jigs of varying sizes for accurate attachment of leaders and trailers in the darkroom. A big problem next was to cut the film along its length for the smaller cameras, and this had to be done to an accuracy of 1/16 of an inch, all in total darkness. This problem was eventually solved by adapting an old machine designed to cut wallpaper. I've shown you earlier a rough idea of how the elaborate film processing is done. Afterwards, and once it's been washed and hung up to dry, comes the moment of truth when you inspect the result. This is when you know if all those hundreds of hours of work involved have paid off. Firstly, the elaborate spool preparation. Secondly, embarking on long journeys across the world carting very heavy equipment. Thirdly, in researching and reconnoitring the perfect stance and location for the camera. Lastly, in waiting for the right weather and light conditions. But I'll need to make another film to tell you all about that. Sometimes the results are a disaster. The actual exposure can take a minute or so, and things happen during that minute which can't be foreseen. For instance, a moving flock of birds can register as meaningless black streaks across the image. Because the film is colour transparency, the exposure has to be accurate to half a stop, and the light levels have to be constant throughout the rotation. The sun going behind the cloud at the wrong moment can ruin the picture. The procedure is so expensive you don't want to make more than one exposure if you can possibly help it. On the other hand, if everything has come off There's nothing quite so exciting to me in all my experience as a photographer than in putting one of these giant pictures up on a light box and seeing for the first time a successful exposure in all its fantastic and unparalleled detail. Just look at one image from my collection. It shows Europe's largest brick structure, made out of 20 million bricks. You can count a lot of them if you look closely enough. After the film has been deemed successful, then what? For many years, that was it. If people were going to see the images, then I had to construct giant light boxes to make it possible. This is my first showing at London's Photographers Gallery in 1979. The light boxes had a 90-degree curve to enhance the panoramic camera effect. My next move was to find a way of making prints so that the images could be duplicated and sold as fine art objects. As I said earlier, the people who made a business of group imaging with circuits over 70 years had evolved techniques for making multiple contact prints several feet long. But that was all in black and white. Colour was new territory. Printing from colour negative involved one order of difficulty, but printing from a transparency was something else. It wasn't until 1983 that a process evolved which could really do justice to my giant transparencies. It offered fantastic quality and, more importantly, colour longevity, and was much superior to anything in the negative to positive world. It was called Cibachrome and was only available as a positive to positive image. The big plus was that the azo dyes used in Cibachrome have an unequalled resistance to sunlight and other ultraviolet contamination. Some of my Cibachrome prints have now been up in public spaces for more than 20 years and show no signs of fading. 200 miles away from my home in the UK, there was a photographic laboratory which had a machine capable of processing long rolls of Cibachrome. The snag was that they had no means of making giant contact prints. It wasn't something that they ever needed to do. So my next invention was this piece of kit. The glass frame has the film image taped onto it. The light is then switched off and the Cibachrome paper is then rolled out underneath, and the two things then sandwiched together. The whole contact frame sits between two metal rails and has wheels which run on the rails. At one end is this construction. Within its frame is a conventional colour enlarger. Its function, however, is not enlarging, but merely to project a variable filtered light rectangle downwards. There is a lens with diaphragm so that the quantity of light can be varied. At the other end of this 12-foot bench sits a tiny electric motor. The worm gear it drives in turn rotates a drum which hauls the coloured rectangle of light along the contact frame by means of a cord. Once the exposure was made, I used to roll up the Cibachrome paper in a light-tight tube and post it off to the lab. After a few years doing this, the Cibachrome people brought out an affordable desktop processor, and I was able to carry out the whole business in-house. Before we leave my darkroom, I must mention this little homemade gadget. It's a machine I adapted for enlarging sections of the panoramas, and it can handle film lengths up to 20 inches long. As such, it was at the time probably unique in what it could do. If you want to read about its construction and capabilities, then look at the website shown at the end of the programme called Big Shots. Over a 20-year span, I have made several hundred panoramas by these methods. You may probably never have seen one. One reason for that is that they are all in private and public collections. They were made at a time before scanners were on the market, and the reproductive technology of that era couldn't handle such large originals. Hence, they were almost impossible to turn into mass media of any kind. Well, I've got no regrets about that. Mass media can't do justice to such massive pieces of detailed information without losing its whole purpose. The special film is all used up now and won't ever be made again. But even if it was, I doubt there would be many people willing to go to all that time and trouble. It was certainly no pathway to fame and fortune. I'm still moving forward, slowly translating all those big transparencies onto massive digital files, and someday I hope they may be seen even larger on some kind of huge electronic wall. Walls are where they truly belong. Most photographs are taken with the single click of a button, and they are assimilated with an equally brief glance. My images take much longer to make, document a massive amount of information, and require much more effort by the viewer to be appreciated. And the darkroom? Well, sadly, I don't see anyone following in these footsteps, so it'll probably end up as scrap metal. That's why I've made this film record before it happened.